Hey guys, Max with Ironman 4x4, and today I'm going to be working with you on installing the new Ironman 4x4 ATS suspension for this 5th gen RAV4. Model years are 2019 through current. Grab your tools, I'm going to need some help. We'll get this thing bolted on. Now before we get too far along, let's talk about safety. If you're using a lift in the shop, make sure your feet are in the right place on the vehicle, raise it up. I like to shake it out to make sure it's not going to fall off, because you would hear something move if it's not sturdy. Then set it back down on its safety locks. That's always the best way of doing that. If you're working in your garage, on the back of the vehicle, your e-brake's not going to help you. So vehicle in park, chock your front tires, then jack up the back of your car and use jack stands properly. And if it's stuck, just give it a little like that. All right, so I've got the RAV up in the air with some room so I can work on it. I've got a jack stand. I'm going to support this lower rear control arm here, because to get this shock out, this link droops into the way of the shock bolt. So this guy here is a 19. I'm just going to loosen it up. This bolt here is a 14. Don't pull the nut off though. The nut has teeth on the flange side of it. It's not meant to be wrenched on and off. Go from the bolt side. All right, with that out, we should be able to pull that link. Look at that. All right, now let's go after this 22mm nut. So we'll pull the nut and the washer, and now we need to go up top for those 217s on the upper shock mount. And once that's out, we can just lower the shock right down and out. All right, so with our stock rear shock, we are gonna stick it in a vise and tighten down on the shock top mount. Then grab yourself a pocket knife, a screwdriver, a body clip removal tool, and you want to pry underneath this plastic cap. You'll pop it off just like that. Set those aside. So grab a 6mm Allen key and an offset 17 wrench. We'll set them up like that, and we'll break her loose. Once you get it off there, you can grab the bottom of the shock, push it up. All right, now the OEM nut's a 17. Set that aside. We'll take the stock shock out, set it aside. Grab your Ironman shock, and it came with an 18mm serrated nut, so you want that. We'll pop this band off, we'll cap off the end. And then what we're gonna do is slide the Ironman shock right up back side of that. And we'll get that 18mm nut out. And for this, I'm just going to grab a deep dish 18 socket on my impact. Get it locked down nice and tight. And we're done there. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, we've got both driver and passenger side rear shocks out. Now we got to disconnect the rear sway bar. What we're going to do is we're going to hit this guy right here. It's a 14. Loosen it from the bolt side. Ooh. Ooh. I use my super grip. Perfect. Now with the sway bar bolts undone on the rear left and right hand side, let's go ahead, make sure that this lower control arm is supported with a jack stand if you're working on the floor. And we're gonna pull this lower spindle bolt out. It's also a 14. There we go. Let me explain something really quick. Stick with me, camera guy. See that nut? You might think that's a serrated flange nut. It's not. And I don't really know what this is called, but it's got 4 of these teeth. When you see this kind of a nut, especially from Toyota, you are supposed to loosen from the bolt side. Once this nut grabs on, it's not supposed to be twisted. It's supposed to bite in and stay. So now with all that out, we can go ahead and lower our jack. And there we go. So 2 things are going to happen. This lower control arm is going to slide out from the spindle, and your link, your in link for your sway bar is going to start to slide out too. And don't forget, you still got a lot of pressure here because this coil is pushing down. So make sure you're being careful as you lower this down. This is going to want to walk down and slide. Okay, we'll slide that out of the way. And now that is loose. If you need to, you can always come back here and you can loosen up your eccentrics for your alignment back here, but this seems pretty loose, so I think if I hang on it, it'll want to pop out. Again, what we're trying to do is just get this thing to come down enough that we can get that coil out of the perch. There we go. Now, don't just take your coil out and throw it away. We'll make sure we keep the orientation the right way. So we got an isolator at the top. We'll go grab our Ironman coil and I can put it back in the way this came out. All right, ladies and germs, I've got the stock OEM coil out and I've got our Ironman 4x4 performance coil out, this Toyo 82A coil. Now, you want the part number facing up, just like this. You can see the difference in height. We're gonna pull this rubber isolator off our OEM coil and send that on its way. And then this guy here, we're gonna plug right on the top of the pigtail like that. Next step is we gotta get the coil back up into the car, and this lower control arm, we're gonna need a lot of droop out of it. So two ways of doing that. One, we can actually loosen up our eccentrics here. You're gonna need alignment anyways, but I don't really wanna loosen that up because it's like right on the edge. So a little bit faster and easier for me is to grab a heavy duty ratchet strap. And again, we've got both sides in the same configuration. So I'm just gonna tighten this guy down. Also, don't forget, there's another little rubber isolator that goes on the bottom of the coil. I like to align it so that it sits in a similar spot. And then we can fit this bad boy back up in here. Now, it's gonna take a little bit of maneuvering when you get it back in. And so you'll see here, we actually need a little more droop. So I'm gonna tighten down the ratchet strap and buy us a little more room. So this upper perch has a bit of a dome to it, and that's what you're hooking the coil on and around with the isolator. I like to push the coil to as far back so that it stays in place, because as we go to compress this coil back up to hook it up to our spindle, this is all gonna kind of walk towards the outside of the car. So you can kind of set yourself up for success, keeping it towards the back. We've got this rear passenger coil set and it looks good. I'm gonna go get the rear driver's side coil in. That way we have both sides set up. Then we can go ahead, get everything pushed back into place. All right, we get our ratchet strap out of the way. Now, one thing I almost forgot to mention, and it's very critical, you wanna make sure that before you put your coils in, position your sway bar all the way forward and up with the links hanging down. That's really important on both sides. If you have your sway bar down here and go to put this lower control arm with your coil in and bolt it all back together, you won't have room to get your sway bar back in. So make sure it's pointed up top. Okay, now we're ready to close our control arm and get it tied back in to the back of our spindle here. So this is inherently dangerous, so please be safe, use caution. If you're not comfortable with this, take it to a shop, have them do it. It's not worth hurting yourself if you're not a mechanic and confident in what you're doing. But if you go slow, maybe have a friend help keep an eye on things with you, you can get it done. All right, we'll just keep trying to walk that in. Now, if you got your bolts confused, it's the longest one. So I'm gonna put a 17 wrench on the back of the nut and we'll tighten this 14 down. Let's get this rear shock in. Also, don't forget to put that dust cap back on the top if I forgot to mention it. So I'm gonna lower it down through the top. We'll get it over the shock pin. Hit it with the sledge. There we go. I'm gonna position it up on the top side. I will throw washer and nut, and I believe that's a 22. We'll lock that down. Take your link, start back here on the subframe side. Just get the front of the bolt in, just a little bit like that. Then swing this link up here, and if you can, wiggle it around, because you're just trying to get it to start in there. Then grab yourself a sledge, knock that in, knock that in. There we go. So I'm gonna put this 17 nut on the back of this 14 bolt. Throw that 17 nut on the back. We'll tighten it up, then we'll lift it back up off this jack. All right, while we still got the car in the air, I'm gonna go ahead and get this rear sway bar end links back in place. Now you've got one on the left and one on the right, so as you bring this down, you don't wanna bind them up, so you kinda have to work back and forth. All right, you might need to wiggle this sway bar end link into place, but grab a pry bar and I want to get these 17s back in here to button up our top shock mount. Everything's to higget down. So we're done with the back and can move to the front. All right, the back was a little bit of a hassle, but all the hard work's out of the way. The front is way easier. Bring your vehicle down. You want to get the hood open because we're going to need to access those strut tops in the engine bay here, and then we'll get our front wheels and tires off. Hey! To get them out, you're going to have 3 14mm nuts on the top. So grab a 14mm wrench or a gear wrench. This one in the back, you're not going to be able to use a socket because it's real tight. So I'm going to slide in there with the open side and we'll get it broke loose. And then what I like to do, which you may not like to do, so I'll do me and you do you, but spin one of these all the way to the top, but leave one on and then take the other 2 off. That is because when we get on the bottom side of this and pull everything out, this McPherson strut, if you pull all the strut top nuts off, it'll just come bombing out when you're not ready for it. So leave one in here to kind of catch it. Then when you're ready on your schedule, you can remove it. Isn't that nice? Now we're on the underside of this McPherson strut, and just like we always try to remind you, before you mess with anything, order of priority is always electronics first, hydraulics next. So we want to make sure we get our ABS lines out of the way and our hydraulic brake lines, because it should go without saying, but if we unbolt everything and this falls out and we rip our ABS lines or our hydraulic lines, we get to go down to the Toyota dealership and pay primo price to get these factory parts replaced. So we don't want to damage something that we can't fix because it's just going to tie us up. So we're going to start with a screwdriver or a body clip removal tool, and we're going to pop this ABS wire bracket that's sitting on the back side of the strut itself. So you just kind of want to pull it back, slide that down underneath. That little plastic clip pops right out. That's free. Then we're going to move over here, grab a 14mm wrench or socket. We're going to pop this bracket off. This bracket pops off and out. Further up the food chain, we've got a 10 mil, and we'll loosen this up too. Now this may not be necessary. I don't think we're going to droop things out so far that we're going to have any tension on here, but better safe than sorry, man. Now we want to attack our sway bar end link. This one's rusted on pretty good, so if you've got that problem, throw a little WD-40 or penetrant on it. It'll help loosen it up. The other thing too, you know, if it's brand new and not rusted, sometimes you can just throw a socket on here with an impact and spin that 17 off. But on this one, we're going to grab a 6mm hex key or Allen key. Who uses hex keys? Witches? Wizards? Warlocks? There we go. And then I'll let that Allen key sit up against the back of the strut body. Use my gear wrench and we can get the thing off. All right, got the end link out. Spin this nut back on so I don't lose it. Now I already went over to the driver's side and took that out. Just don't forget, when you're messing with sway bars, you have to do both sides at the same time or it won't articulate for you. So get that out of the way. Like me, I have to use both sides of my brain if I want to be articulate. Think about it. With everything else out, now we can get the lower mount bolts out. It's going to be a 22 wrench on the bolt and a 22 socket on that big front nut. Commence. Okay. And this one, when you slide it out, have your leg or something supporting the bottom of the spindle, because once we pull this out, this will pull away. There we go. Couple things to remember here. Your spindle, you can just kind of rock it forward and it should sit because it's got the steering rod, the steering tie rod here kind of holding it in place. What we don't want to do is we don't want to jack this whole thing out and away because you will dislocate your CB axle. So either grab a bungee and secure it, but if you just rock it forward, it'll pretty much stay there. Now, if you remember back to, hey, look at that. You don't know how to spell Tokyo right. Unreal. This is hanging here, right? Because that 14 mil strut top nut that we left up top, that's why this didn't come rocking down on us. So I'm gonna keep my hand under here. I'm gonna move up. With my left hand, I'm gonna push up on the strut underneath. And with the top, I will spin that 14 mil nut off. And got it. So grab your spanking new McPherson strut from Ironman 4x4. Get it out of the box. You're gonna need to make sure you've got the right side for the right side of the car and the left for the left side of the car. And there's a couple ways that you can tell. One is there is an upside down R stamped right there into that bracket. So we've got the strut in the right position. It's gonna be 1 pin facing out of the wheel well and 2 pins facing the inside. I like to spin off this supplied hardware, these strut top nuts. I'm gonna take them off. Now you can use them if you want, that's why we provide them, but I kinda like using the Toyota hardware too. So it's the same thread pitch, TPI, if you're high speed, which I know you are, you've always been. So that's ready to go. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna hang on to one strut top nut, and when I go to put this in here, let's get it aligned, and if you get one pin in here, you can kind of rotate it around to get the other two, and then up and over the top, you find that front stud, and just get a few threads. Okay, I'm gonna grab the bottom bolt and nut for the mount. You wanna make sure your ABS wires and everything's out of the way. I'm gonna rock the spindle back. And again, you don't want to dislocate your CV axle, so I'm gonna push the strut back in towards the car, bring the spindle around, line it up, and then push it all back. Now you might need to get your leg underneath to kind of support it. And once you line up the holes, we'll take this big 22 bolt and we'll try to get it lined up with the hole. There we go. And we'll push that through and we'll spin this 22 millimeter big old hoss of a nut on there, just like that. Now, before we put the top bolt back in, there's a couple things I want to talk about. The way Toyota designed the RAV4s for alignment purposes, there's no eccentric on this upper bolt, which is really weird. This is where an adjustable camber bolt would go if you need it. The way Ironman designed this ATS suspension is so with the size of the hole in the mount, you have enough adjustment to get it dialed in. You shouldn't need, what I'm saying is it comes out of the box ready to go. When you put this together and take it in for alignment, the tech will have no problem dialing it back into the OEM specifications. That's point A. Point 2 is if you are a high-speed tuner kid and want to have a full-blown stance party, and change the way your alignment is, if you want to try to go outside of the box and go higher or change it up, or there's just a different setting that you want, Ironman offers iCamber 17 adjustable camber bolts that have an eccentric on them. So you can run those. That will give you a much larger range of adjustability. You don't need it to get it right, you just need it if you want to mess with things. All right, so to tighten up the top of this strut top, grab your strut top nuts and start with the threaded stud in the back. It's really hard to get to because there's real tight clearances there. It's kind of up against the cowling or the firewall back there. So spin that one on finger tight, and then if you've got a ratcheting wrench, don't use it because you will trap your wrench in there as you tighten it down. So unfortunately, this is kind of a slow going process. Grab the open end of your wrench and tighten it down. So it's going to take a little bit, but that will keep you from donating a wrench to the project. Now, as I'm tightening this down, I'm also watching this front outer stud and making sure that that pilots up through that hole correctly. So as we tighten it down, it'll draw it up. So I've got that fairly tight. I've got enough threads on that stud that I can get a nut on it. So I'm gonna spin that down, spin one on here, and then I'm gonna go ahead and start tightening this 14. All right, that's pretty snug. I'll snug this one up. I think the torque spec on this is like 40 foot-pounds, so get it tight, but don't go crazy. And then I'm gonna go back and check. Yeah, see how that loosened up? It went from super tight back to loose. Spin it down, and now we can finish it. Finish him. Now I'll get the sway bar in link button back down. That's a 17. Now I'll just double check that everything's tight. We got the wheels and tires back on, the RAV's on the ground. It looks amazing. I really like, whoa, dude, this thing is sitting high. How much lift did you get out of this? Like 2 inches in the front and 3 in the rear. Well, that's true, but not for everyone. Depending on how much weight you carry, your ride heights might vary a little bit. Well, how many of me are there?
Hey, dummy, why don't you tell everybody where they can get this
I'm
at?
trying, you guys keep interrupting me.
Calm down.
If you want to get this Ironman 4x4 suspension for your RAV, go to ironman4x4america.com. We can take care of you over there. You guys need to shut up when I'm making these videos. They're hard enough as it is.
You shut up.